Welcome, folks. I'm JABY KOAY, joined by ACHARA KIRK.
Yo.
We're looking at Canadian lads. I watched Spider-Man No Way Home in 0.25x speed, and here's what I found. So this is the follow-up video, the part 2 to his part 1 of the same subject. If you guys haven't already, hit that subscribe button, bell icon, all notifications, and pretty please vote this up to let YouTube know you're enjoying what you're watching. And thank you to the Canadian lad for allowing us to react to this. Very, very much appreciated. While you all are subscribing and upvoting stuff, make sure to subscribe to Canadian lad as well if you haven't done that, and give the original an upvote if you can. Okay, here we go.
Hey everyone, I'm the Canadian lad.
Oh boy, my back.
My back! Oh, my back! And this is part 2 of my breakdown for Spider-Man No Way Home at 0.2 Febic speed. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, I would strongly recommend you watch that before you watch this video, because I'm gonna begin this breakdown exactly where the previous one ended. So it's very important you watch both parts, especially this one, as I'll be giving you tons of hidden details and Easter eggs from the scenes where Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Tom Holland all appear together. But don't worry, if you watch this video first and then watch part 1, it will still be okay, as long as you have watched the actual film. Now, full disclosure, this is not a 0.2 Febic speed breakdown, but I did watch this movie 8 times in the theaters, so please give me some leeway for including 0.2 Febic speed in the title.
That feels weird, but I'll allow it.
I promise you, once the movie releases in 4K, I will watch it in actual 0.2 Febic speed. Now, Strange wants to send all the villains back home, where they will get killed by their universe's Spider-Man, but Peter wants to fix them first. So Peter steals the box and Strange goes after him. He traps him in between 2 portals where he forces Peter to web his own self up, and then Strange pushes Peter's astral form out of his physical body. But even without having a soul in his body, Peter is still able to dodge Strange's attack and doesn't give in. This is because of Peter's heightened spidey sense, which seems to be even more effective inside the astral dimension. And for the first time in live action, we are visually able to see Peter's webby spidey sense being at work. Strange then sends his cloak of levitation after Peter, and for a few seconds we actually get to see Tom's Spider-Man donning the cloak of levitation, just like it happened in the comics and in What If episode 5. Now the other thing is, we know the cloak is sentient. It proves this time and time again in Doctor Strange, Infinity War, and What If, where it often makes its own decisions. Strange obviously knows this, so he may have sensed that the cloak might not have agreed with Steven, so by throwing his cloak, he pushes it towards Peter, forcing it to do his will. Or maybe because Strange has already worked with Peter, so he knows how fast Peter is. So he gave the cloak a little push it needed to catch Peter. Even inside the mirror dimension, Strange had to throw it again. So it seems as though the cloak just doesn't want to chase Peter by itself, eh? Strange then runs past a newsstand selling copies of People magazine. And notice the current issue features an exclusive interview with Liz Toombs regarding Peter's secret identity, where she calls him a liar, which kinda seems fair. I mean, Peter is literally the reason why her father went to prison. And we can again see the same Time magazine with the Iron Man Jr. front cover. Peter then manages to defeat Doctor Strange in the mirror dimension, because, well, he's just good at geometry. I mean, why would you expect Doctor Strange to be good at math in the first place? He's a doctor after all. Okay, that was a terrible joke. All the villains then agree to follow Peter's plan, where Peter will essentially fix them before sending them home. Then Norman says one of the most famous lines ever said in movie history.
You know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
Peter then takes everyone to Happy's condo, and we can see Electro turning the TV on with his electric bolt. Notice on the television there were updates regarding the Statue of Liberty getting renovated with Captain America's shield.
I didn't catch that.
Then questions Peter's ways of trying to fix things. But notice in the background, Norman Osborn was way too interested in Dummy. This is because the inner goblin of his is scouting all the things that he can use to his benefit, especially anything technological. Out of all the villains, only Electro and Green Goblin had the most interest in this new universe, and they turned out to be the most lethal as well. Now, Electro over here is slowly falling in love with this new world. He has a new body and looks way cooler than he ever did before, and this new power is devouring him completely. Peter and Norman then pull up a lot of science stuff together, and I cannot believe we actually got scenes of Tom Holland and Willem Dafoe working together on a cure to fix Alfred Molina's Dr. Octopus. Notice how careful Peter was while creating a new inhibitor chip. He needed extremely steady hands, and our boy Peter did it. So he finally comes up with an inhibitor chip that gives back Doc Ock control over his tentacles.
Doesn't it seem slightly strange that Green Goblin would help Peter Parker with curing Doc Ock if his whole goal was to take over, to fight, to do, bad guy stuff?
Yeah, I don't know, unless he just allowed Norman Osborn to be in control for that period of time, and meanwhile Green Goblin was just kind of sitting in the back watching and judging, and then when the moment was right, he popped out.
Oh, that's fair.
Yeah,
that's fair because Peter Parker's spider sense didn't go berserk until after Doc Ock was healed.
Yes.
Notice the red light on Doc Ock's arms immediately switches to white as he regains control of them. A red light means the tentacles are in control, while white means Doc Ock is in control. That's some continuity detail given the fact that we've last seen this back in 2004. Now, having gained his conscience back, Doc Ock returns Peter's nanotech, kinda like a thank you. I absolutely love the idea of integrating Peter's regular suit with nanotech, turning it into this beautiful piece of artwork. Peter then started working again to help fix a Lizard, Electro, and Green Goblin. And notice the Stark Fabricator appears to have names of C. Connors, or Curtis Connors, aka the Lizard, Max Dillon, aka Electro, and Norman Osborn, aka the Green Goblin. So even in such a short time, Peter manages to make different profiles for different individuals. It's nice to see him being extremely careful while trying to make something that will return these villains to their previous forms. He doesn't want to mess this up. And notice a very important detail here. While Peter was working on the cure of these 3 villains, only Electro's cure was 100% complete. Dr. Connors and Norman Osborn's cure were still work in progress. That's why later in the film, when Aunt May injects the cure into Green Goblin, it doesn't work.
That makes
because
sense.
the serum wasn't ready yet. Doc Ock then asks Norman how it feels knowing he will get rid of the Goblin. And that's when the Goblin inside Norman kicks in. But Peter's spidey sense starts sensing the Goblin's presence. He walks around the apartment trying to sense where the threat is coming from. Now keep in mind, Tobey's Peter couldn't do it. But Tom's Peter has such a heightened spidey sense that he literally felt Osborn's personality changing to the Green Goblin. And notice when Peter's spidey sense got triggered, on the left side of the screen, we can see the Stark Expo model from Iron Man 2 leaning against the wall. This is the same model that helped Tony come up with a new element, which essentially saved his life and eventually the universe. So the fact that such an important piece is just sitting around in the background implies that Happy may have a lot of Stark tech in his house than just the Fabricator. I love what John Watts has done with this film. This movie has as many Spider-Man as you can get, but it still remains an MCU film through all these Easter eggs in the background. Now for the first time ever, we're visually and audibly shown how Peter feels when his spidey sense is activated. His focus gets so heightened that he even starts to hear the heartbeats of people around him, and hears an echo of everyone's voice, which allows him to listen to everyone distinctively. I appreciate what John Watts has done with this film. He has basically shown us everything that there is about Peter's spidey sense in this movie. Peter finally boils it down to Norman and figures out he's the threat.
The indication that this Peter Parker is stronger in his spidey sense than the other Peter Parkers is actually interesting, because when Canadian Lad was emphasizing that moment where his spider sense is so strong that even when he's outside of his body, it's still active. I was thinking for the moment, I'm like, that never really came back. Like, that would have been interesting if there was a way to bring that back again to, I don't know, some kind of advantage in the story.
Right.
There was really no opportunity that was afforded with the way the story went. But I guess it does kind of come back in that sequence because his spidey sense is so strong that, like, even with nothing actually happening, it's just like red flags are going off for him.
Yeah, no, I have always loved the whole spidey sense thing because to me it just kind of speaks to intuition and like muscle memory and your body communicating to you, and that's what I love about when his soul, his astral form is knocked out of his body still has knowledge, his body still knows something weird is going on, and so his body is able to just move reflexively, and so I just kind of love that idea of, it's just part of his biology.
Yeah.
Goblin has taken over him again. Notice how the space between his teeth also comes back as the Goblin takes over him. So the Goblin even changes Norman physically, not just mentally. So I guess Norman's case is the
Wait, that's wild. It's like it's one of those things where I kind of noticed it, like my brain went, wow, Willem Dafoe is so good. He can change his face to be Green Goblin. And then when he pointed that out, my brain just kind of exploded a little bit because it's like, yeah, there is a gap, and then there wasn't a gap. Like, oh my god, that's so
like in the
cool.
original Spider-Man movie, Willem Dafoe once again wore prosthetic teeth as Norman Osborn, and his real teeth were shown for the Green Goblin persona. Now a massive fight takes place where Willem Dafoe has done every scene he's in to perfection. I mean, look at how he was laughing when Peter was throwing all those punches. How can you defeat a villain that enjoys getting hit? I'm telling you, he has only appeared in the MCU for one film and has already made more impact than some other villains. Now Peter and Goblin's blows cause an entire building to crumble beneath them. In the alternate universe comic titled What If Volume 2 number 105, Peter and Norman have a similar fight, which ends up with Peter losing his leg and Norman his life. I'm actually surprised by Willem Dafoe's quick moves even at the age of 66. My guy walks with an expression evil enough to scare you to death. I mean, the fact that he chose to return as Norman Osborn on one condition, and that is he wanted to do his own stunts, is enough reason why he's so good in his craft. The Lizard then joins in the fight with Norman and tells Peter that there are always consequences when you try to fix someone. Notice how the Lizard leaves claw marks on the side of the building. Also, if you think about about it, the fact that the Lizard was just sitting back in the truck, waiting for the others to turn on Peter is kinda terrifying. Because Lizard is a villain, so he knows how other villains think.
Yeah, why was he allowed to just hang out in the truck? I think you've said this before.
That whole thing with
why?
The whole thing with Lizard just seems so messy to me. Like him hanging out in the truck.
So I just had a thought. Maybe they left him in the truck because there was no way they could get him inside the building without being seen. Because presumably there's probably like a doorman or something. And so it's like, oh, hi there. We have a whole bunch of people and a giant lizard. Although Doc Ock has like a bunch of tentacles.
That's all well and good. Why is he not put in any restraints?
Because Peter's too trusting, that's why.
He knew they're gonna turn on Peter as soon as the opportunity arises. Green Goblin then kills Aunt May with his glider, and the entire tone of the movie shifts from here. Notice how the first person Peter worried about was Aunt May when his spidey sense got triggered. So he could sense that whatever threat is upon him will eventually kill Aunt May. And by killing Aunt May, the Goblin again proves he's the most evil among all villains. He's the only one who would go after Peter's loved ones, no matter which version of Peter he's facing. There's actually a deleted scene where Tobey and Andrew's Peter warn Tom, saying the Goblin always goes after the loved ones. Now, as Aunt May dies, she says the most important Spider-Man catchphrase, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yes.
But her line is a little bit different, as she says, with great power, there must also come great responsibility. Now, you might think this is changed from the original line, but the truth is, Sam Raimi's version is the variation. She actually said the original phrase printed in the very first Spider-Man comic issue, which has the words, there must also. And you may as well think they've at least changed it a little bit in the MCU, given the fact that it's now Aunt May saying this and not Uncle Ben. But originally in the comics, this phrase wasn't said by Uncle Ben or any other character at all. It was actually said by Stan Lee as a closing commentary on the first comic. Now, hear me out. The fact that this is the first time Tom's Peter is hearing this phrase implies that when his Uncle Ben died, he didn't say anything like this to Peter. So in Tom's universe, Aunt May was destined to say this line, not Uncle Ben. Even in the credits, where we see a sketch of Marissa Tomei as Aunt May, in the background, there's a very subtle Easter egg where we again see this catchphrase.
Wow.
Happy then arrives on the scene and realizes instantly that May is gone. He takes a few to prepare himself to be able to digest the news. But notice, even when he saw the love of his life dead in front of him, and he himself is getting handcuffed by the Department of Damage Control, he still screams, Peter, get the hell out of here. This shows his true affection for Peter Parker. He could figure Aunt May died and that is kind of Peter's fault, but he also accepts the fact that in order to do the greater good, you sometimes have to lose the one you love the most. Cut to Ned's grandma's house, where he uses the sling ring and portals a different Peter Parker, who is currently in this universe, Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. I can't believe Marvel photoshopped him into the entire movie. But then Ned opens a portal again, and this time Tobey Maguire's Peter walks in. Let me tell you, lads, I knew this was gonna happen, but when I watched it the first time in the theater, I was shaking. I was shaken to see the childhood hero of mine coming back after decades to reprise his role as Peter Parker. Tobey is the original Spider-Man, and no one can take that away from him. Now notice Andrew Garfield introduces himself as Peter and Spider-Man, but Tobey only introduces himself as Peter Parker, and doesn't even mention him being Spider-Man. Also, Andrew Garfield's Peter spends the entire length of his screen time in his Spider-Man costume, while Tobey's Peter waits until it's time for the final battle to even confirm that he has the costume with him. This actually represents the general audience consensus for their strengths in the role, that Maguire is awkward, nerdy, and is the perfect Peter, while Garfield is cool and quippy and is the perfect Spider-Man, so neither really captured both sides of the character. Therefore, Garfield spans the whole movie as Spider-Man, while Tobey spans as much of it as Peter as he possibly can. This is why Andrew says he has no time for Peter Parker's stuff, but Tobey has everything sorted with MJ and is probably married with the kid, so this movie didn't ruin any of their character arcs. In fact, it preserved it. It showed us Tobey is still the perfect Peter Parker, while Andrew is the perfect Spider-Man, but Tom Holland is the combination of both. They then all meet on the rooftop, cute. And Andrew explains how his life has been ever since Gwen died. He became rageful, which might indicate that Andrew in his universe might have started killing people instead of just catching them. And Tobey explains how Uncle Ben's death was on him, and even after he took revenge, it didn't bring him any closure that he was expecting. So Andrew is telling Tom he could either become rageful now that Aunt May is gone, while Tobey's telling Tom he can get revengeful. But that's not what they're saying, are they? They're basically guiding Tom which paths not to cross. They're both telling him this is what we did, but we don't want you to do that. Then all three of them recognize the words, with great power comes great responsibility, and this is the line that kills the tension between them, as it ensures Tom that both Tobey and Andrew are on his side. So a line originally said by Stan Lee is what broke the ice between them. Couldn't be more poetic. They all return to the high school, and we can notice how they turn on the lights on the 3rd floor of the building. All three Peter Parker then nerd up together and work on a cure to fix all the villains. And there we get a reference to the famous Spider-Man pointing meme.
For Andrew Garfield not being the werewolf, the wolf, is it the wolf or the werewolf?
He's the werewolf.
Okay.
He was the werewolf.
He looks like a werewolf. The hair and everything.
Yeah.
It looks just like a werewolf. Not adding anything to the conversation here. I'm just saying there's a whole thing about him lying and saying I'm not there. He looks like a werewolf.
Yeah.
Tobey then shows off his organic web shooters, and notice he still has the same scar that we've seen in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 1. This has to be one of the best continuity details. I mean, we're talking about something we've seen in 2002
Super
and
cool.
then in 2021. Now, Marvel and Sony have actually planned this. This is not just a CGI detail. It was on the script. Notice how Tobey was the only one who removed his gloves, but Andrew didn't. It's because in the next scene, Tobey had to show off his organic web shooters. So it's fair to assume that it was written that Tobey would take off his gloves, and we'd be able to see the scar. Now, notice while Tobey was flexing his organic web shooters, Tom interrupted and said, "We're getting sidetracked." But Andrew was still focusing on Tobey's wrist. And at the end, Tom was flexing about being in the Avengers. But Tobey cut him mid-sentence, shouting, "How is this helping?" Even then, Andrew was quiet. Meaning, out of all three Spider-Man, Andrew is the one who listens the best, while the other two kind of possess a complex personality. Cut to the final battle on the Statue of Liberty, where Tobey has some issues with his back, which is actually an inside joke because back in 2004, Tobey was almost replaced by Jake Gyllenhaal to play Spider-Man, as Tobey had major back pain.
Wow.
Still made it into the MCU, didn't he?
That's right. And Spider-Man.
This, of course, could also be a nod to Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2, where Tobey's Peter actually hurt his back in the movie. Andrew then helps crack Tobey's back. I mean, of course, Andrew Garfield is the greatest at cracking backs.
That wasn't a back, that was a neck. That was a neck. And it wasn't even her neck.
It was connected to the spine.
It was her head.
It was her head, yeah.
No, but yes, all of that is...
Yes. Connecty.
It's the backside, I suppose.
Yeah.
A moment to appreciate how great Andrew was in this film. He openly said he wanted brothers and treats the other Peters as such, and even verbally admits he loves them. Offers Tobey a back crack, as I mentioned already, and is happy to see Max, aka Electro, and even apologizes for disappointing Max because he's not black. It's almost as if Andrew's love for Spider-Man and his happiness to be back transcended into his character as well. We could see it. In every scene that he's in, he stole it, despite having Tobey and Tom in the same scene. Tobey then talks about how he fought Venom, and Tom mentions fighting Thanos. But Andrew calls himself lame because he never got to fight any cool aliens. And that's when the OG Spider-Man approves of Andrew and tells him he's amazing. So with that stamp of approval, our boy deserves a third film now more than ever before. And it also goes to show it wasn't Andrew's fault Amazing Spider-Man 2 didn't work out. He's an amazing actor and an amazing Spider-Man who was just given a bad script. If you write him a good story, he will do wonders on screen. Now, the first time all three Peters tried to work together, it fails miserably. Which makes sense given the fact that Tobey and Andrew never worked in a team before. But Tom's Peter did. That too with the best of the best. And that's how the story comes full circle. While Tobey and Andrew told Tom how to deal with grief, Tom taught them how to work together as a team. Then they make a new plan of dealing with one villain at a time. And of course, Marvel plays the same joke of the Avengers being a band over and over again.
Broke up? Like a band? Like the Beatles?
I told you I don't want to join your super secret boy band.
Now this one is my favorite detail from the entire film. So yes, out of part 1 and 2, this one is my favorite. Notice when all three Spider-Men swing together in this iconic shot, Tom actually turns towards them and shoots his web from both of his hands that Andrew and Tobey catch respectively.
I couldn't tell who was who in this moment.
Honestly, I was
like this was flying by. I'm like, it's all of them.
It's all the Spider-Mans.
I couldn't tell one of them apart throughout most of that sequence.
Yeah.
So for the first time ever, Tobey and Andrew were swinging with a web that isn't their own. And for the first time, Tom was swinging with the help of two other Spider-Man. And then comes this shot where all three Spider-Men land on top of the Statue of Liberty. Notice the landed order of each actor's portrayal of Spider-Man from first to last. First, Tobey Maguire, then Andrew Garfield, and lastly, Tom Holland. Now the way Tobey's Peter lands and sits here could be a reference to the classic Spider-Man crouch pose in the comics. Now because this is the money shot of the movie, we can assume a lot of thinking and planning were put into this. Like how will Tobey land, where will Andrew be standing, so on and so forth. So with Sony and Marvel making them pose the way they did couldn't be random at all, and here lies my detail. Tobey's classic Spider-Man crouch could be a nod to him being more reserved and stealthier than the other two, while Andrew's pose is more open and blatant because he's more vocal and loud. But Tom's pose is something in the middle, quite literally. He's not too reserved, neither too open. He has a subtle viciousness in him with a little touch of stealthiness. Tobey then successfully cures Flint's mark and reverts him back to his human form. But then Lizard enters a portal and goes to the school's science lab. Another callback to the Amazing Spider-Man where Andrew fought a lizard in a library. Notice the strength of Tom's Peter judging by the way he kicks a lizard here. I mean, that's a strong kick. Doc Ock then appears and helps all three Peters fight Electro and cure him. And notice in the shot where Doc Ock saved Tobey from Electro's lightning, we can see that Tobey has made a few changes to his suit. His eye shade seems to be more white in the center, and way more darker around the edges than before. Also notice how Tobey's Peter feels physical pain a bit more than Andrew's Peter. They both were equally under attack by Electro. In fact, Andrew took more damage. But at the end, it's Tobey who's holding his chest, and Andrew is just out of his breath. This indicates how this version of Spider-Man is getting getting old, and all this fighting is taking a toll on his body. Tom then cures Dr. Connors, and up comes Doctor Strange, who was dangling over the Grand Canyon for 12 hours, similar to how he treated Loki in Thor Ragnarok.
What a weird cut.
Yeah.
My back!
Max Dillon then talks to Andrew Garfield, and they both agree there must be a black Spider-Man somewhere, which is clearly setting up the stage for Miles Morales in the MCU, and I cannot wait to see it. We've already seen Miles' Uncle Aaron in Spider-Man Homecoming, so it's only a matter of time now. And then one of my favorite scenes, the reunion of Alfred Molina's Doc Ock and Tobey Maguire's Peter. Honest confession, I actually cried during this scene, and even while editing, it still touches my heart. And notice how Doc Ock's arms are glowing whiter than ever before, and it just goes to show how the original Doc Ock will always be on the good side. And I missed one detail in my previous breakdown, but thanks to my viewer Victor for showing me this. Notice when Peter takes control of Doc Ock's arms in the beginning of the film, the arms glow blue, which honestly is another amazing detail. Then arrives Green Goblin with his sinister voice in the background. Can the Spider-Man come out to play? A callback to Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 1, where he said the same thing to Tobey's Peter.
Can Spider-Man come out to play?
Now notice when Green Goblin fires spinning blades at all three Spider-Man, all three of them jump and flip in a manner reminiscent of Tobey's Spider-Man when he evaded the same weaponry in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 1. Goblin then bombs the magical box that unleashes the spell across the city. As a result, the whole renovation of Statue of Liberty breaks apart, and MJ falls from the scaffolding. Tom's Peter tries to save her, but he gets pushed by the Goblin. But Andrew sees this and quickly throws himself to save MJ. And finally, Andrew's Peter redeems himself by saving the love of Tom's Peter. Notice this time around, he didn't try to web her like he tried to web Gwen. Instead, he forced himself down and caught MJ in his arms. He held her in his arms instead of webbing, so that even if webbing doesn't work in time and they touch the ground, he would be the one taking the damage, not her.
Yeah.
Andrew must have thought of 1,000 different ways he could have saved his Gwen.
Yeah.
So he was well prepared this time for a situation like this. The way Andrew acted out in the scene with tears in his eyes is just one of the greatest moments in the MCU now.
I still wish that scene was done similar to the way that random YouTuber person did it, with like a little bit of a flashback of Gwen.
Yeah.
Just slow it down a little bit. The movie's 2.5 hours. I think we could stick around another 20 seconds to just slow that moment down. That was basically the end of his series up until No Way Home.
Yeah.
That's what we were left with. She dies. The movie ends at the cemetery. It's over. You know what I mean? And so I just wish that they emphasize that moment just a little bit more. As much as I wouldn't want slow motion, the way Sirius Black dies. I don't want slow motion, generally speaking, unless it's helping to emphasize an action moment. I think that would have been justified. This is something that has been sitting in his brain, in his rote memory over and over and over and over again. I think we're justified to let that moment linger a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I can see how that could work really well.
Peter and Dafoe's Goblin. Now this is happening on top of a giant Captain America shield. This fight gets pretty dark pretty quickly. This is the first time we actually see Tom's Spider-Man throwing hands in the MCU. His combination of using his webs along with his punches and kicks is just phenomenal. I mean, notice how he utilizes his web to make his kick more heavy and impactful. Now Tom trying to kill the Goblin using his own glider isn't just a callback to Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. Tom is specifically using the glider to kill the Goblin because he wants revenge for the death of Aunt May, who was killed with the same weapon. But then Tobey intervenes and stops Tom from killing Green Goblin.
That's the moment that got me choked up. That was the moment that got me emotional. I don't know why. It just did. That was Tobey Maguire.
It's his eyes.
It's his eyes. There was something in his eyes that said everything you needed. He didn't say anything verbally. It's just the expression in his face did all the work.
Yeah.
This is also a nod to the fact that he never wanted Norman Osborn to die in Spider-Man 1. This is also him getting closure by saving his best friend's dad. And also, this is not what Peter Parkers are supposed to do. They don't kill. My boy Tobey acted with his eyes here. Didn't say a word, but still conveyed 1,000 different emotions.
Yep.
But surprise, surprise, the Goblin strikes again and stabs Tobey in the back. Tobey was stabbed before as well in Spider-Man 3 by Harry Osborn. So both times he got stabbed, it had to be an Osborn. But then Tom sees the bigger picture and cures Norman instead of killing him. Meanwhile, the multiverse cracks open, and we see a lot of Spidey villains preparing to enter this universe, including Superior Spider-Man, Kraven the Hunter, Scorpion, Black Cat, Rhino, and Mysterio. So Peter then asks Strange to cast the forgetting spell again, so that everyone forgets he's Spider-Man, and that would be the only way to stop all this madness. So Tobey and Andrew share one last goodbye with Tom, and Tobey says that's what we do, and they all end up hugging each other. So beautiful. Peter then promises Ned and MJ that he will come back and remind them of who he is. MJ doesn't even let Peter say I love you back because she wants him to say it when he finds her again. Doctor Strange then casts the spell again, and everyone forgets that Tom's Peter Parker even existed. Nobody has any memories of him anymore, although everyone still knows Spider-Man exists. They just don't know who he is under the mask. Peter then goes back to MJ to remind her of everything and tell her how much he loves her. But seeing the band-aid on MJ's face, Peter decides to sacrifice his love because everywhere Spider-Man goes, chaos and calamity ensues. ensues. So instead of saying I love you MJ, he just orders a coffee. And that's the heaviest ending out of all Spider-Man movies so far. He has no one now, literally no one to talk to, except for the coffee cup that he got from MJ, which has now become his motto, we're happy to serve you. This particular cup also appeared in Daredevil on Season 2, Episode 5. Peter
cup's everywhere.
And there he meets Happy, but he doesn't recognize him. Notice May's tombstone says, when you help someone, you help everyone. This is taken directly from the PlayStation Spider-Man game, where a similar tombstone can be found. Peter then moves to his new apartment, which really looks similar to Tobey's apartment. After all, this is how Peter's life should be based on the comics. Now, even though we do not see Mr. Ditkovich, but we do hear Peter's new landlord telling him rent is due on the 1st of the month, so we may as well get to see Mr. Ditkovich in a future installment. And notice Peter has a GED test guide because now he has no academic record. I mean, our Spidey didn't just lose his family and loved ones, but lost his entire credentials. So in a true sense, there's no way home for him now, is it? Because there's no home left. What he has to do now is make a new home, make new friends, and then turn them into a new family. The movie ends with Tom Spitter swinging in his new red and blue suit, inspired by the classic suit in the comics. Many are actually reporting that Tom took inspiration from Tobey and Andrew and ended up making this costume. But that's not entirely the reason. If you notice during the credits, Tom was already working on a new Spider-Man suit and a brand new symbol. He even put his initials and dated it 2023. But No Way Home takes place during 2024. So with this symbol being dated a year before, indicates Tom Spitter had already started working on a new symbol after he came back from the dead. Thanks to the Comic Book Insight who came up with this detail, make sure to give him a follow. Now in Tobey's credits, notice there's a compound of CH2OH. It is known as ethylene glycol. Now ethylene glycol is used as a raw material to produce polyester fibers and anti-freeze material. Putting this formula here beside him might be indicating that his body can produce ethylene, which is then used to produce organic web that he shoots from his hands. The movie really balanced between giving an epic fan service and developing character arcs. Marvel could have dropped the ball with this one. With such a big cast comes the great anticipation of a compelling story. The fact that they pulled it off, that too in such a grand scale, goes to show that Marvel and Sony can do anything as long as they put time and effort into writing a good story. This is now my favorite Spider-Man movie of all time. And no, I'm not saying this movie is better than Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. If Sam Raimi's Spider-Man didn't exist, this movie would have never been made. But was this movie perfect? No. But that doesn't mean it wasn't good. Movies made during the pandemic are going to have flaws, especially CGI flaws. So when I point out subtle visual details and appreciate the VFX team, I'm not only doing this to prolong my content, I'm doing this because they deserve the credits. Lads, just a side note, after releasing part 1, I actually received an email from someone who works at Marvel, reaching out to me and I kid you not, giving me compliments for finding out all the small visual details, because they work extremely hard to put them in the film.
Wow.
So I'm really proud of the work that I'm doing, and I couldn't thank you lads enough. And that's it. This would be my complete breakdown of Spider-Man No Way Home, and I cannot wait to see it on Blu-ray so that I can watch the film in actual 0.25 epic speed and find tons of more hidden details.
That was a thorough video. I do wish that it was a little bit more focused on the details, or at least like you take sometimes with these videos, what I find is like, whether it's Canadian Lad or anybody else, sometimes what I find is that there's a lot of moments in the video, and maybe it's a necessity of kind of going over what happens in the story, like a synopsis, or just an explanation of here's what happens in this scene, here's what happens in this scene, and it's like, okay, I saw the movie too, so like, I know
saw
that.
It 3 times, in fact.
Yeah, exactly.
Not 8, but 3.
But and so I guess I shouldn't assume that everybody has as much of an interest as you do, as I do, right? And so maybe most people watching these breakdowns have only seen the movie once, perhaps, and so they benefit from those synopsis moments.
Oh, well, I think it also lends to a certain type of structure as well. Like, it just feels nicer to incorporate some of the story and then incorporate the details and stuff like that.
Whenever he's doing the synopsis stuff, it just feels like such a significant amount of the video. I just wish that it would just jump to the next cool detail, because there's a lot, you know? And I think that, you know, what you get then is a shorter video that has more of what I'm looking for. But like, I mean, more power to him. So he's able to construct a 25-minute video. So that's pretty neat.
Yeah.
Some of the details that I appreciated the most in this video was when he was linking it to the older installments, older Spider-Man films. Yeah. Because he's going, okay, here's, you know, what's going on in this movie, and here's exactly where it shows up in the previous film and whatnot, down to like the lights of Doc Ock's, you know, octopus hands. I thought that was pretty cool. Seeing stuff like that because for films I haven't visited in a long time, that's super neat to see, of just how much the filmmakers involved in this were paying attention to the previous films and honoring them. Yeah,
that was really cool. And the thing that really blew my mind was the fact that the immortal phrase, with great power comes great responsibility, or more accurately, with great power there must come great responsibility, was not actually said by any character in the comics, but was in fact like a kind of thing that Stan Lee penned in the comic, I was just like, oh my God, mind blown. And it was also just kind of sweet because, you know, it's Stan Lee and he's not here with us anymore, but it's nice to just kind of still have his work and his words just living on after him, you know?
Resonating forever.
Yes, forever and ever and ever into the void.
There were some details in here that I wasn't completely sure about. Like he talked in particular about Doctor Strange having to throw his cape because maybe his cape didn't agree with him. That didn't seem to be the case to me, but maybe I'm just not paying attention. I didn't watch it 8 times.
I think it's really cool when he picks out details that are like, oh my God, I didn't see that. But a lot of it is kind of interpretation as well. And so I would say that that is maybe his interpretation of the situation. We don't know for sure if that's really the case or not, because I think I'm more inclined to agree with you where he just has to throw it because it needs some momentum.
Yeah.
You know?
One of the coolest details that he picked out here was one that kind of blew your mind, which is Osborn's teeth.
Yeah.
You know, Green Goblin's teeth, because when he's Green Goblin, it's Willem Dafoe's actual teeth.
Yeah.
Whereas when he's Osborn, it's like a perfect set.
Yeah.
With the caps and everything.
That's crazy. That's so cool.
Yeah.
That is such a cool thing. And of course that was another thing that was a callback to the earlier films. But I love that was just like this little minute thing which, you know, your brain does notice these things, but you just quickly like move on to the next thing or you gloss over it and then you're like not even thinking about it. You're just like, wow, isn't Willem Dafoe an amazing actor? Which he is, but also what a cool detail.
I think that one of my favorite moments in this that was pointed out was the 3 Spider-Men of when they landed and like they each had their own unique pose and where they were in the frame. They landed in a particular order which represents the order in which they showed up in cinematic history. But also, you know, Peter Parker, Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker, the way he lands in particular is so reminiscent of this iconic pose that I've seen Spider-Man do over and over and over again growing up, because I watched that opening sequence so many times, even independent of the show. I just love that song, that Spider Blood. I love that song so much, and just the way Spider-Man lands on the logo is so iconic to me. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't connect the two because it looks exactly the same.
Yeah. And even his interpretation of the characters and, you know, like how the different stances reflected their personalities. And then also even how Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man always being in the suit was an indication of how Andrew Garfield is the best Spider-Man, whereas
he's just more Spider-Man,
he's more Spider-Man, whereas Tobey Maguire is more Peter Parker and more of like the awkward, nerdy guy. I thought that was such a cool detail or a cool interpretation, because so much is communicated subliminally through costume and set design and things like that. And you know, props to him for uncovering all of that and sharing that with us. And like he said, having someone actually reach out and be like, you know, thanks for noticing all this stuff. Like, that's really awesome. And it just goes to show just how much thought and effort is put into each scene, each frame of the movie. It's amazing. Yeah.
You guys, thanks so much for hanging out with us. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Do subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that bell icon, please, all notifications, and vote this up. Thank you, Canadian Lad, for allowing us to react to this. Very much appreciate it. Y'all, if you haven't subscribed to him, please do so. There's a link in the description below. I'm JABY KOAY. This is
ACHARA KIRK.
Peace out.